So the purpose of this webinar is to look at how we can automate using robotic process automation within the access control and identity and access management processes. So ultimately we're looking to automate and increase the efficiency of joiners, movers, levers, showing how that can actually work within an automated environment. So let's see what scenarios we've got for today. So there's many different things that we can do. We'll look at some of the inherent SAP options available, so things like SAP scripting, personas scripting potentially, and some of the batch scheduling that has been around for ages, basically since SAP became a credible software back in the 1990s. Then what we're going to look at is some of the GRC technology, integrate that with HR, and look a little bit at the controls mantra as well for looking at access risks as an automated access control, and a little bit about bot housekeeping. So stay tuned for that. So first of all, even though you may have heard this from an earlier webinar, we'll look at some of the different types of RPA available in the finance function. So some of the different types: execution of human activities, so the scripting of user actions, looking at repetitive data input and execution of those without necessarily direct human intervention. We can look at the way that the system automatically provides data to us that allows the human to focus on just providing that human intelligence and letting the system or the bot actually generate all of the pre-work for it to collate the information into a relatively easy to understand and easy to analyze information set. Moving on from that, we'll start looking more towards the actual automation of issue detection. So getting the system to define and understand what should be an issue and highlighting that to the human. That includes things like configuration monitoring and also transaction and potentially data outlier monitoring as well. We can also take that again a further step to look at the monitoring of actual transactions and proposing those blocks directly. So that's actually with a bot providing that automated decision really. For those of you interested in GDPR, that comes with the same little pitfalls, but that's a topic for a different day. And then what we've got to think about is how do we operate in a bot-filled environment? So what sort of things do we need to have in the form of governance and controls over those particular RPAs, and what does that look like? Does it actually give us the comfort that we need that the bot is actually working as intended, and are the people who are meant to be following those automated processes? So let's get going. So first of all, looking at automating human actions. This is really the core process for how you would actually go about doing an RPA project. So looking for relatively repeatable, very logical steps that are easy to automate from a process point of view, and being able to get those moving into the actual system rather than wasting the time of the actual human. Now this has been around for a very long time within SAP, and there are huge different ways of doing that. The most obvious is actually just to record what we call a CAT script or just an SAP script. Now assuming that your systems are set up in the correct way and configured in the right way, that's as simple as clicking on the GUI icon that you can see here on the screen and just recording that script. Now that does allow for human activities to be recorded and individual system clicks and steps to be recorded. However, there are a huge amount of warnings with those. As with any traditional RPA scenario, it is very, very dependent on the accuracy of the recording. So any minor screen changes, any variables with the data content, or any issues with data quality, then that will result in errors in both the recording and the playback of that particular scenario. So be very, very careful with those scripting. Another slightly new way of doing things is using the SAP Personas tool. Again, a very, very powerful tool in the SAP kit bag, and we still see that as being very underused from an implementation perspective. Primarily, it's used to do a screen mask, so literally taking those screens and making a new persona of it. So allowing people to control sensitive fields, so removing those, masking those fields, simplifying the screens, because as we all know, SAP isn't necessarily the most user intuitive screen, particularly in the older versions. But it also does allow you to do that similar sorts of scripting. So you can automate some of those different alerting functions, and you can record those scripts in a slightly more end-user centric manner. So you get a little bit more variables to play with. You can do parameterization and actually allow external inputs so that you can maintain those scripts in a little bit more of a future-proof manner. Very, very good for those of you that are actually looking to get more into that RPA and scripting scenario. So the real power when we see automated controls within an access governance space is when we're integrating the setup and the management of users and authorities within an integrated process. So a really good example of that is the joiners, movers, leavers process, and that's the real focus of today's webinar. So what we're looking to do is try and remove these many disparate teams that may be involved in a traditional joiner or a traditional leaver process. So if you can see, we'll have line managers involved, potentially HR teams to set up some elements of the data, going into service desk teams to raise and report the right sort of tickets, which eventually get through to potential IT administration teams, SAP security teams, who will set up user IDs, assign access to them, and do all of that kind of stuff manually. Well, there's quite a lot of intensive effort goes into that. So if we could automate a lot of those activities and keep those in line from an access management point of view, then they allows us to have great levels of automation and greater levels of efficiency in those key control processes. So allows greater flexibility to be able to be dependent only on the HR function. We have less chance of human error, less chance of mistakes coming through those sorts of process, and we're tightening up the efficiency to allow that to really work in an automated manner. There is still a dependency on the timeliness of reporting to HR, but as soon as HR knows and does their activities, then we don't have the latency of going through those disparate teams within a traditional HR process. So let's have a look at that. Let's see how we get on. So we have here an SAP S4 system, so right up to date, but there's still some of the older school transactions in there. So let's have a look at PA30. So in here we've got an HR record, employee number 77, and for those of you that aren't aware, we've got an info type, so a data set. This data set is info type 105, and subtype 001 is the system user ID. So that's what we would use from an SAP access point of view to assign authorities to user. Now we haven't got one in here at the moment, which is a great start. So what we can do is we can just create one. This could be what an HR process would do. They may configure it into a joiner action or something of that ilk, but we'll just set the start date as today, and we will set up a user ID for the processes of this RPA demo. Now we can see RPA demo does not exist in the period, so it's a brand new user ID. If we click on that save button, that record is created, and what this will do is send a call directly to the GRC system, and their ultimate aim would be to set up that user ID for this particular employee in the SAP S4 system, but also in the GRC system with a whole set of default authorizations. So let's check that that's happened. So we're looking for an RPA user. So let's just see which of those are in the system. And straight away, we've got RPA demo set up with the user's name. We can have a look at what's been created in there. We can see it was created automatically. We've got the user ID, the first names, surnames, and we've got some default access assigned in the S4 system. Now that's great. We could understand that that would be good. But what's really powerful is if we can automate that creation across the enterprise. So here we've got a different SAP system. It's a GRC system. So very different. We haven't logged into that before. And if we look for that user ID, we can see That has also been set up with the user's names, and it's actually used a technical user ID. So that is, in our case, the bot that's gone into the GRC system and created that user with a different general access role that will be available. And all the end user communications, all the email notifications would have absolutely been sent to the end user saying, here's your password, or here's a link to your password self-service screen so you can self-register your own password for use. So there we go. Automated joiners process based upon an HR action to create the user in two different environments, all ready to go based upon one action there. So the next scenario that we can look at is another long-standing piece of functionality within the SAP environments, batch job scheduling. So that's a really good way of getting the bot to do the heavy lifting or to execute a lot of the batch processes that we can see in a normal operational environment. So rather than end users having to do all these things directly, we can schedule that to be run in the background, get the automated batch scheduler users to actually do those programs and provide those outputs or reports back to us if there's any issues with them. So we've got a couple of scenarios here. Now, those are potentially automated controls, but it could be for any program in the SAP environment or any program in any other enterprise system, assuming that they've got the same capabilities. So in this case, we're going to look at some of those access-orientated control points. So again, we're going to use GRC as our potential testbed, and we're going to use a transaction SE38. Now, if we put the program in here, we can search for those programs. Not got a encyclopedic knowledge of every single SAP program in here, but I'm going to just run a search for those locking programs. So here we go, that's the one I want, lock, unlock users. Now, if we execute this directly, we can see that there is a whole different set of parameters that we can use to do it. We can select by users, we can select by dates, we can differentiate different types of locks, or we can do various different other selection criteria. We can do a test selection, we can do various different activities here, and we can set the different parameters. So what I can do here is say for users that have not logged on for 60 days or have not changed their password for 60 days, I could save that as a variant and I could have 60-day dormancy. Lock after 60 days. Now I could also schedule that in the background. If I did that, I can do that immediately. I can set it up as a periodic job. I could set it up as a date and time one and set the period values and decide when I want to do it. So I could have a daily job that runs and it will start immediately. So it will start at 5 to 10 every evening and decide to lock all users. Now if I did that, that would be done on my own user ID. However, if I wanted to be a little bit smarter about this, I could go to a transaction called SM36 and I could specify it at this point. Got lots of typos and all that sort of stuff in here, but I can define a step and I can choose it to go against a different bot user. Have that same program and I can select the variant that I saved. So there we go. There's my step. We can see that it's going to be executed under that batch user. Got exactly the same start conditions, so I could do that. I could start it in the middle of the night. I could change the period values to go daily. Check that, save that, all good. So I've got a start condition, I've got the frequency of the jobs, and I've got the job step. I can also send an email notification if I want and suggest what status I want to see that. So again, I can include and improve upon the notifications that go through there. So once I save that, I can schedule that to run, and there we go. And we can see the status of that in SM37. Now obviously I've got a lot of different jobs running, but there we go. There is my dormant job. There's my spool, and I could go and see what was going on with that, look at the spool details, and understand what it is that was going on. All of these users have been successfully locked. Very good, very good, very good. So immediately allowing me to improve my compliance without necessarily going in every day and locking those users that have not logged on for 60 days. So a great improvement in the control environment and achieved through automation. And in that case, the bot is the user ID that's executing the job, which is my WF batch or my bot user. So we've looked at some of those access control checks to automate the new joiners via HR integration and HR triggers, so setting the users up in two different systems, looking at automated batch jobs scheduling so that we can actually perform different control activities such as locking those users, and we can also then look at other ways that we could use this similar technology to do various different checks. So either running those synchronization jobs to actually perform data preparation activities in the SAP technology, or scripting SAP to be able to actually perform those human-based tasks if we can logically define the process. What I wanted to finish with now is just a couple of little elements of the process control modules where we're actually looking to see how we can govern and operate within a controlling environment with these RPA information there, and how we can demonstrate better adherence to compliance. So again, various different aspect risks that we can look at, access risks to provide effective controls and actually making sure that we are performing the right sort of functions, not just reporting on a theoretical access control. So the actual control here that we're talking about is the running of those violation reports to actually see who has got the right level of information. But that again requires manual effort. It allows people to actually see that, but only if they log into the GRC system and actually perform those steps themselves. So why don't we get GRC to do that for us and only report if there's an exception? So in this way, we're again removing the inefficiency, enforcing the control standard, but also allowing those people who are in control of that to manage via exceptions rather than take a diligent and proactive approach towards identifying those potential pitfalls. So let's have a look and see how that works. So we've seen the S4 user interface. That again was how we did some of the HR processes. We've seen the GRC front-end interface, back-end interface. So now let's have a look at the Fury side of things. So this again is the GRC12 system, and we've got the Fury-based tiles. As you can see, one or two of those because I've got all access in the system. So one of those is the workflow inbox. And as you can see, we've got a number of different prepared scenarios here, some of which pertain to access controls. So the first one that I'm going to look for and just pick out is evaluating those individuals with authorizations to maintain exchange rates. So this is a functional check to look at an access orientated control. So rather than just looking at a blanket control as to who's got access to these particular transactions or tables, what we're looking here is to get the process control system to look into the configuration settings, but also to look into those users with the authorization to be able to maintain it. So we've got a double value check, and we've got two issues that have been identified. Now this one is evaluating those with authorizations to maintain the exchange rate. So already here, we've got the system that is proposing that we've actually got a problem. So it's made that decision and it's decided to fail the test because we've got more than a tolerable exception count. So what we can see here in the results, we've got many hundreds of people who are able to maintain the exchange rate in this particular environment. Now we could have justifiable people on this list. We could have people that are not authorized to do it. So again, this is looking for people that do not have a control assigned to them or a risk waiver, but they're already being able to violate those access rules. So we don't have to go into the access control engine, explicitly run a report for doing this. We can actually have this set up and running on a daily basis that will provide us with the exception-based report and only tell us if there's a problem with that. So really good insight to actually turn that theoretical access risk into more of an access control. And we can see all the details around how it's provided that information if we so choose. Now further on from that, we've actually got a control check that we can look at and say, has the configuration been changed to an undesirable level? And we can see, yes, it has. So we've got a deficiency that's high risk that's saying that the exchange rates are not looking good really. And here we can see that the exchange rate in the table is far too low. The currency exchange from Great British pounds to US dollars is greater than 1.5. So again, great for the actual UK economy if it was at 1.5, not so good for the US. But in this instance, it's a theoretical example that's saying that the exchange rate is outside of the tolerance for what we would expect. And again, that's another example where RPA can be applied in a more functional basis. But again, that's one for another day. So what we've done here is integrated access control with a functional control check to identify the theoretical risk posed by nearly 900 users being able to access that table, but correlating that with a configuration setting that says that that is an intolerable situation to have. And there's been no interaction from an end user perspective. It's just been highlighted to us through the machine and through the bot. It's already identified me as the owner, so I'm able to make a decision and do what I want against that control. There we are. So another example, and just to finish off, we've got the bot housekeeping. So if we want to get control over our environment, we need to make sure that the bots are doing what we want, and also the non-bots or the humans are actually being able to do what we want them to as well. So there's always exceptions, there's always different scenarios, but there could be ways to report on that as well. So just because we've got an automated or a bot-based process does not mean that it's perfect. We still need to check up on it from time to time. We still need to make sure that those processes are working. And again, we've configured one of those. So in my workflow inbox, I've got an alert which is set up here that says, is the provisioning and the user changes being processed not by the robot? So we're looking at business KPIs that's saying, is anybody subverting the process? Who's changing user IDs when it should just be an automated provisioning solution, as we said earlier? So within that regard, we've got a similar sort of end user interface. We've got the ability to be identified and targeted as and when there is an issue that's not in line with the configured expectations of the tool. So here you can see the output. We've got a medium priority here now, so it's not quite too high. It's right in the middle there just to understand exactly what it is that we're actually meant to be doing. And in exactly the same way, we can look at the evaluation criteria and we can see that there were failures, but the impact of it isn't a massive one. So it's not a high degree of failure, but it is still a failure. And what we can see here is that the following users were changed. And they were last changed by all of these different users here. So it was not the designated bot user that we'd designed the process against. Now some of them may well be technical users and be false alarms. So eRecruiter, for example, may well be legitimate, but why is Hamid T actually making direct user changes to users in the system? And again, we could be tolerating that, but it's not what we want from an automated and RPA based process. So we can still use the GRC environments to actually report on the safety and the security of our environments, even when they're operated by bot-based processes. So I hope that we have adequately explained what it is that we should be doing. Just to summarize, the bot is going to be a great addition to the landscape. We're able to do a huge amount more automation, remove a lot of manual processes from our certainly administrative processes and possibly from our end user business processes as well. But we should always be making sure that those KPIs are in place to make sure that we've got the right level of automation in our environments and that the bots and the users are all still doing their parts. So we still need to retain the same level of governance, hopefully just in a more efficient manner.